There's the instrument panel installed and pretty much laid out. We've got everything wired in, set up. The only thing I don't have is the controls for the carburetor heat mixture and the cabin heat controls. But I've got all of the circuit breakers and switches put in. Everything's all wired up. This is what it's going to look like from the operator side. Okay, this is more or less what it looks like from the working side under the combing, cowling, boot cowl, whatever it's called. All wired up. I've got to plumb in the pitot-static system. I had to make a few new wires. I had to look in the instructions and figure out how to wire up this air-operated switch for the Hobbs meter and the Hobbs meter. I had to redo a little bit of the wiring on here. I had it bundled up too tight, and I needed to open it up and spread it out. It doesn't look as pretty, but it's more functional, and there's not as much weight on the wires hanging there vibrating and stuff, so they're less likely to break. But everything else is pretty much the way it's going to be. It's not too bad. The last little bit of wiring that I need to do is to wire up the light circuit for the instruments. I wasn't going to do that, but I decided to go ahead and do it. So this is the light circuit for the instruments. They've got it wired up into some kind of a circular circuit, and I'm going to redo all of this and clean it up and make it into a parallel circuit. So I've got one leg that's definite ground and one leg that's positive, and I'll run it parallel so that if one bulb goes out, it won't take out the rest of them like on a Christmas tree light. But this is kind of a mess the way it is, so I'm going to see if I can't clean this up a little bit. And I can take one of these lights out, reduce the number of gauges in there in the instrument cluster by 1. I changed the CHT and the EGT into a combination unit so I can eliminate one of these. See if I can't clean this up a little bit. Okay, the wiring is done. Redid this wiring harness for the light fixtures or the light dealies in these engine instruments, and I like it better. And I've got the ground running out this side down to a ground, the power lead running down that side and down to the nav light switch, so it comes on when you turn on the nav lights. The only thing I don't have hooked up here yet is the EGT and the CHT wires. My ground wires are a little bit loose and disorganized here, but they're actually not too bad. They come in pretty good. And there's a tab here welded onto the cross brace, and I put a number 6 nut zert in there. And then I got a long brass 632 screw. I cut the head of it off. I screwed it through both sides so I can run. I don't have too much overhang out here for my ground wires, but I got that on both sides. I've got my ground wires clamped down with brass screw, brass nut, and got a brass lock washer on there. I've got 2 ground points here, one on both sides. Some of the grounds I brought over here to this side, some of them are over on the other side. So I've got good ground points there. And all the rest of the wires are all bundled up. I got a little bit extra cable here, the antenna cable for the marine radio VHF, and so I've got it doubled over here. It'll be before I had it up in the wing, doubled over up there, but this is a little neater setup here. So I've got both antenna cables. One of them's for the GPS, the other one's for the marine radio. Both of them are running here, and the antenna cable for the aircraft comm radio is running up the other wing post over there. Those are all in. Next thing I'm going to do is plumb in this pitot-static system. I've got to run a static line over here into my altimeter, down to the VSI, and over to the airspeed indicator. Then I've got to run a pitot line into the airspeed indicator, and then over here to the air-operated switch for the Hobbs meter. The pitot-static system is all plumbed in. Got the main line coming off for the static system, coming down into the VSI, and then into a T, and then running up into a T into the altimeter, and then off of that running over to the airspeed indicator. And then we've got a new line running from the wing route up into the airspeed indicator, and then teed off from there over into this air-operated switch for the Hobbs meter. As air-operated switch for the Hobbs meter, I use the old line for it. It's got an orifice in it to restrict the airflow into it, so you can't just replace it with a straight line. and it had a few nicks in it here where it had been rubbed on the wiring before, or some of the things underneath in the other airframe, and so they weren't all the way through. I could have just put it on as it was, but I took a piece of heat shrink tubing, and it's this thick-walled heat shrink tubing with adhesive on it, and I just put that over the sore spots on there, and that'll fix those. So I run that piece up, and the other pieces, the short pieces, I went ahead and cut new pieces to fit. Some of the original stuff I went to put on there, and I got to looking at it, and it had some pretty good cuts and nicks in it and stuff where it rubbed on places. So I just went ahead. I'd ordered a new piece of line, and I had it here. I intended to replace all the lines with it, but once I got to looking, I didn't have enough to replace all the lines up through the wing root. So I checked out this one line going up through the wing root, and it was in pretty good shape. I did put a piece of heat shrink over one spot that had a little sign of wear on it, but it wasn't very bad. And then I put the new line on the other one because it had some pretty rough spots down in here. They didn't go through, it wasn't penetrating, but it was some pretty roughed up spot. I thought about putting heat shrink tubing over it, but I just decided I had enough of the new line I could go ahead and put in there. So all new instruments in here are rebuild instruments, and none of them had any fittings on them. So luckily I'd pre-ordered plenty of fittings, and I didn't use most of what I had. I used a straight inline fitting here on the airspeed indicator where it runs over into the static side, and T's in the rest of them, and that was it. That did the system. So it's pretty clean, pretty straightforward in there. Should work. I did have to redo the airspeed. I made a mistake and swapped these two lines in here. I had the static line going in the wrong side, and the pitot line going in the wrong side. I did check them. I could hardly see the stampings or the numbers on the letters on the casting here on the case. I had to go dig out a flashlight so I could see the numbers and the letters on there, and when I did, I realized I had them swapped around backwards. So that took about 5 minutes to correct that. That was no big deal. At least no big deal to fix it now. Got all of the wiring done. I did find one wire coming off of the turn coordinator, the ground wire that I didn't hook up, that I'd missed when I hooked everything else up. So I put a terminal end on it and hooked it up, and I think everything is all hooked up in here now. I still have the push-pull cables for the carburetor heat mixture and the cabin heat controls, and I still got to clean up this primer line and make up new lines for it. And then, of course, we'll have all of the heat stuff and everything to do when I put the firewall on. But that does it for the instrument panel, and the instruments. They're all finished.